Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the CGA BRI Talk series. We'll be changing things a little bit today and talk about a different South Asian country, namely Bangladesh. We have with us here today Professor Lailufar Yasmin to talk to us about Bangladesh's engagement with the Belt and Road Initiative. Professor Yasmin is professor and chairperson of the Department of International Relations at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. Her areas of interest include Bangladesh and South Asian affairs, China and East Asian affairs, amongst others. Some of her notable achievements are Fellow of the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, DKI APCSS, Hawaii, United States, and a Fellow of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, CAS, Beijing, China. She was awarded her PhD from Macquarie University, Australia. Professor Yasmin, I know you're very tight for time, and as you've been saying, you have a lot of responsibilities as the new chairperson of the Department of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. So without taking too much of your time, can I know Bangladesh's involvement with the Belt and Road Initiative? Now, Bangladesh joined the BRI in 2016, a delayed entry compared to some of the other South Asian countries. So can you give us a brief overview of Bangladesh's engagement with the BRI over the last 6 years or so?
Thank you, Bhagya, for inviting me here. And this is an extremely interesting area of discussion because you know how the idea of what are the ways South Asian countries are engaging with China is a matter of concern, is a matter of much discussion worldwide because often South Asia was not seen at the center of international politics, but that has changed. If you remember one of the 2013 article published in Foreign Affairs, it also questioned whether South Asia exists, and now the whole world understands how South Asia exists, and especially you know the world is interested to learn about what are other South Asian countries thinking, except for India and Pakistan, because South Asia has generally been overshadowed by the politics of India and Pakistan. So I'm very happy to sit here and talk about Bangladesh, which is now the second largest economy of South Asia. So, yes, compared to some other countries, one might technically say that Bangladesh joined BRI a bit delayed. It was declared in 2013 and Bangladesh joined in 2016. But let us not forget that Bangladesh actually was one of the countries which participated in the first BRI summit ever. And from then on, Bangladesh has been actively a part of BRI. Why and how? So here you have to understand that Bangladesh's priority is to is to engage with countries who will be able to be its development partner. China, when it announced its BRI in 2013, it was not yet very clear to many of the countries because it was often still scholars used it as part of OBOR, One Belt One Road policy, or in other manners. So it took some time for different parts of the world to understand what Belt and Road Initiative as a whole referred to. So when Bangladesh became a part of it, and especially when in 2016, President Xi Jinping visited Bangladesh, the very manner of China's engagement with the rest of the world, as well as with the Bangladesh has been clarified to Bangladesh, and therefore Bangladesh started collaborating with China on the projects that were mainly infrastructure based, and this is where Bangladesh needed a lot of foreign investment, foreign assistance so that its internal economy can actually receive the pull through development of its infrastructure and facilities. Therefore, I would not clearly say that Bangladesh was a delayed, participant in BRI. Rather, Bangladesh was one of the first, countries to join in the summit, and Bangladesh gradually became an indispensable part of, BRI for China.
So, indispensable partner of the BRI. You also mentioned something very important, that Bangladesh took its time in engaging with the BRI, and that this was a thought-out process. This was purposeful. And you said that this was because Bangladesh wanted to see what kind of development assistance it could gain through the BRI. Could you tell us some of the areas that Bangladesh requires this kind of development assistance? I think you mentioned some infrastructure development, but are there other areas that require assistance?
Is not only that Bangladesh, Bangladesh waited to see what were the, activities taken up under BRI, but it's also Bangladesh and China were collaborating in their bilateral relations for quite some time. For example, from 1980s, China has been providing Bangladesh, assistance in building Bangladesh-China friendship bridges. So these were built, on a small scale in areas which were quite distant, which were quite unapproachable before, and that were the areas that Bangladesh-China friendship bridges to connect different parts of the distant areas with the mainstream areas. These were already being taken part. These were not directly under BRI, but these were already going on. So from that manner, Bangladesh never had any sort of concern about China's BRI, if I may point out this particularly. Rather, you would say, that in the manner that China was engaging with a number of countries, that perhaps not yet happened with Bangladesh. So that is why one might say it is a delayed sort of Bangladesh joining. So that is something I wanted to clarify. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about building hard infrastructure, meaning that it was a number of railway bridges, a number of land bridges, a number of small connectivity projects that were being done over here, over in Bangladesh with China's assistance. And at the same time, there were a number of public-private partnerships. There were a number of people-to-people contact level. For example, in the manner that Chinese language learning spread in Bangladesh, and in the manner that cultural exchange took place between China and Bangladesh, these were also very much part of both BRI as well as outside of BRI in bilateral relations between Bangladesh and China.
So there's a lot of hard infrastructure requirements, and this is something that has already been part of Bangladesh-China relations. So speaking of, there was also this interest at one point for the BCIM, Bangladesh-China, India-Myanmar corridor. However, this project appears to have fallen on the wayside. Is it only due to perhaps like Indian apprehension, or are there other reasons? Can you tell us a little bit about it, especially because you mentioned about this hard infrastructure requirement?
Yes, BCIM is something that, is very appalling that this did not work out. It was originally proposed as a Kunming initiative back in 1999 by one of the esteemed professors, Dr. Rehman Sowan from here. So the idea was to connect this part of the world where India, Myanmar, China, Bangladesh, they would be connected, so that infrastructure development between South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Northeast Asia. However, it's not only India which is the factor, but also the way the Rohingya conflict, unfolded between Bangladesh and Myanmar, that worked as a serious impediment, because now Bangladesh is hosting a stranded about 1.2 million of Rohingya refugees, and we have to talk about a meaningful and sustainable repatriation of the Rohingyas, because in my experience, when I went to Cox's Bazar and in different camps over there, I have seen that there are Rohingyas who came came in Bangladesh back in late 1970s, back in early 1990s, and then once again in 2017. So what we need is to talk about sustainable repatriation of the Rohingyas, who are often in Bangladesh, we call them foreign and displaced nationals of Myanmar. So we need to talk about this. And this is one of the main obstacles in materializing BCIM corridor. Yes, India has its own concerns about how BCIM corridor, how this number of roads and connectivities will be drawn up. But while that is a concern, and there is another concern is about how the bilateral relationship between Bangladesh and Myanmar shall be taken up.
So do you think this relationship between Bangladesh and Myanmar would further affect some of the connectivity projects through the Belt and Road Initiative that are already in the pipeline? Especially because you started by saying that this was a very important project, the BCIM was a very important project, and that it's unfortunate that it has not come through. So do you think just like Bangladesh and Myanmar have this refugee issue, maybe in the future, similar issues could come up with other countries as well?
Actually, it's very difficult to point out about the future. You know how future is always uncertain. So what I would rather say, as part of this question is that we need to see it case by case. The kind of BRI projects that China is taking up with a number of other countries. There might be some qualitative issue. There might be some other internal issues. So we need to look into those particular areas with regard to China's involvement in those countries. So BCIM was one of the cornerstone of BRI, and BCIM was also a pet project initiated from Bangladesh. So it was quite disappointing for Bangladesh to see this falling through. But however, at the same time, I believe that if Bangladesh-Myanmar relationship would have taken the way it was supposed to, because economic relationship with Bangladesh-Myanmar was developing since the earlier this year, especially after the issue of delimitation of maritime boundary was somewhat resolved under the UN agencies. So we were looking forward to Bangladesh going on its east as well, as part of Bangladesh's Look East policy. However, all of these were quite affected after the Rohingya, the way how the Rohingya issue unfolded. So I would say, with regard to the other projects, we might want to sort of look at those and evaluate those from a case by case basis.
Okay, so based on this conversation, what are some of the main areas that Bangladesh encounters challenges when collaborating with the Belt and Road Initiative? Are there any specific projects or noteworthy projects that you can give as examples to our audience?
Well, this is a question I think that is in the mind of scholars as well as experts in particular areas for quite some time. For example, when our Prime Minister visited WEF program in Dalian back in 2019, this was the question that was asked, that if Bangladesh was experiencing any difficulties in collaborating with China in any of the projects under BRI. So we have to remember that there are a number of projects that are being carried out by China in Bangladesh which are not directly under the BRI. So in all of the cases, Bangladesh has a standard policy. As I mentioned a little earlier, that Bangladesh considers the merit of the project on the basis of its value, on the basis of its practicality, on the basis of how feasible it is. So each of the projects are very carefully measured, very carefully calculated from Bangladesh's part. So far we have seen that there were a number of projects which were signed with China since 2016, but a number of them were also cancelled. These were either because of fund shortage, these were or because of certain feasibility issues, which were things might seem very doable at the beginning of the talk, and then gradually as you proceed, it might not not seem very beneficial for either of the countries or both of the countries. So a number of projects have also been, cancelled. In fact, right now, the kind of, the number of projects that are proposed between China and Bangladesh, the number is quite high. So there is a lot of, proposals that are being, that are being considered by both Bangladesh and China, then the number of projects that are being implemented. So we need to sort of look at it from those perspectives, that it takes quite some time to check the feasibility of projects, economic projects that can be taken up by China, that can be taken up by both China and Bangladesh. So the number of projects are that would be, over 30 projects that are still under consideration between China and Bangladesh.
This is interesting that you said that there are a lot of projects being considered, but only a few of these projects are implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Are there specific criteria from either side, Bangladesh or China, that are considered when a project is actually implemented? Or do you know what these criteria are?
Yeah, it's quite difficult to point out particular particular issues that determine for a project to whether it will go on or not. However, the initial ideas can be a lot. You can think of a number of productivity ideas, but when you go on the ground and you talk about the feasibility, you talk about practicality of the projects, you talk about how this will benefit the local people. There might be a number of challenges, as we all know. But then also one sort of interesting aspect of China-Bangladesh cooperation has been the soft aspect of connectivity, meaning that the last China-Bangladesh Bangladesh-China friendship bridge that was inaugurated. If we look at the photo of that one, that was imbued. That was a sort of collaboration taken up in a manner where it had both Chinese characteristics as well as Bangladeshi characteristics. So it took into account of Bangladeshi cultural aspects as well as China's cultural aspects. So we can see that when these projects are being done, the soft aspects of both countries are imbued in the project. So it is very difficult for us to identify what were the actual impediments, because often those are very technical areas to comment, technical areas to point out.
So do you think this is how Bangladesh has avoided falling into this Deadtrap narrative that we see in South Asia, especially where both Pakistan and Sri Lanka are associated?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I'm happy that you asked it, because Deadtrap is it's a coinage which has been debunked by scholars scholars from different parts of the world. Because you look at the Sri Lanka's case. In Sri Lanka's case, it was not the Chinese debt, rather it was a number of other issues that contributed to the crisis, economic crisis that they experienced. So there's a number of Chatham House publications which categorically argues that Deadtrap is nothing but a sort of a narrative which is politically convenient for people to use. And if you talk with the policymakers as well as scholars coming from Western background, they would also unequivocally tell you the same thing, that Deadtrap is a narrative which is a political weapon to use against China. So this is once again the question that was asked to our Honorable Prime Minister back in 2019, and she answered very cogently, saying that we sign projects with China on case-by-case project instead of signing a bulk projects without understanding the merits of those for both Bangladesh and China. So and also if you look at the World Bank published data that in the next 7 years the amount of debt that would be paid by developing countries would go mainly to Western financial institutions. Only about 10 to 12% would go to China. So Deadtrap is a narrative that is rather a political weapon, I would say. So this is a narrative I do not think any, conscious experts or scholars would ever talk about. So I do not actually subscribe to that kind of narrative at all. So Bangladesh, in the case of Bangladesh, as has been clarified by Bangladesh's government, and as has been clarified by Bangladeshi scholars, that this is not applicable to Bangladesh at all, and there's nothing that can be identified as a Deadtrap at all existing in the case of other countries, because this has been nullified. This has been proven as a very wrong conception of how China operates in different countries.
Absolutely. And recently, the BRI Talk series spoke to some Sri Lankan economists, and they were talking about actually debunking this and saying that this is not relevant to Sri Lanka. And this is also something I have done in my own PhD research, where I understand that this is not the case. But I wanted to see the Bangladeshi perspective, where the Bangladeshi stance on this. We also say, Professor Yasmin, that there's a lot of research indicating that Bangladesh is the second largest recipient of BRI-related loans from China in South Asia. Now, this is very different to some of the assumptions that are there, because a lot of critics, like you said, there's a lot of political narrative around China's engagement in South Asia. So can you shed some light on this, as a lot of critics of the BRI assume that Pakistan and Sri Lanka are the largest recipients of BRI-related loans? And if there are any differences that you can explain in the form of collaboration between these countries that you've noted?
So again, an interesting question that, when 2016, when China's president visited, there was a promise of $39.06 billion of China's assistance in Bangladesh, which was not immediately under the BRI, and half of which was supposed to take place between G2G level, and the other half a public-private, partnership, or in the form of private investment and collaboration between China and Bangladesh's business circles. So there was a lot of talks about it, writings about it, that Bangladesh is the second largest recipient of China's loan in South Asia. While it's very difficult to clearly say whether Bangladesh is the second largest or Sri Lanka is the second largest, as I said, because number of projects are promised, a number of projects are taken for feasibility checkup, but often they are it was found that these were not feasible on the ground. So these are an ever-changing phase. So it is very difficult for us to say whether Bangladesh is or is not the second highest recipient of China's loan, but a number of projects are are being considered between China and Bangladesh to take up. But how long it takes to carry out the feasibility project, and then how long it takes to implement this project. So therefore, the concerns are there. The hard data is there, but data is changing even as we speak.
Okay, so this is interesting. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of projects coming in, but the data continuously changes and is evolving, very much like a live project. We also see, Professor Yasmin, that over a 10-year period from 2009 to 2019, China has invested approximately 10 billion in Bangladesh's transportation sector, a factor that you were highlighting, saying infrastructure development, especially hard infrastructure development, is something Bangladesh rightly needs. So does this have an impact, this 10 billion USD, does this have an impact on the BRI-related projects funded in Bangladesh?
I do not think I have the exact data with me to identify how much of this is, being invested in the BRI related project and how much is, outside of BRI project. But let me sort of answer it from another point of view, that in a couple of countries, when China is investing, they are not directly under the BRI, because you know very well, India is not a signatory to BRI, but there are a number of projects that are being implemented between China and India, which are often theoretically a part of China's BRI investment, but practically is not, because India is not a signatory. So in the case of Bangladesh, as I say, China has been part of Bangladesh's infrastructure development since mid-1980s. So these projects are going on. So it is very difficult often to identify which are directly under BRI project, which are 100% under BRI or partially under BRI. So there are these nitty-gritties that, are often not clearly, understandable, cannot be clearly identified. So I would emphasize on this part that, we need to be quite, sure before we identify whether some projects are under BRI or parts of it under BRI.
Absolutely. I think this is something that is felt across many countries, because there's also bilateral government to government, like you said, government to government projects that are taking place, that are implemented, but also projects that are considered as BRI projects, or even PPPs, private-public partnerships. Now, Professor Yasmin, based on what you're saying, based on this conversation we are having, I'm understanding that Bangladesh is having a very good rapport with China, and that Bangladesh kind of has the upper hand in selecting projects and is being intelligent about how it goes about implementing it, looking at feasibility studies, etc. So in your understanding, how has this win-win narrative been constructed and sustained?
Again, another very interesting point that, is Bangladesh, started off with virtually nothing in 1971. So from 1971, the perspective of Bangladesh as a state, Bangladesh's perspective was to connect with countries who would be able to provide much needed development aid. So 1970s, Bangladesh's priorities were different. Number one, politics of recognition. Bangladesh wanted to be a part of the United Nations. Bangladesh wanted to gain political recognition by other sovereign states as an international, a legal personnel. And then the second priority was, of course, to draw development aid so that Bangladesh's infrastructure can be rebuilt, Bangladesh's, economy can thrive, because very well, in 1976, a number of, economists titled Bangladesh that a test case for development, that if Bangladesh can develop with scarce resources, then any country of the world can do so. However, as we have seen in the decade of 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, how Bangladesh gradually have evolved from being an aid-dependent country to a trade-dependent country. So this is a phenomenal change that has taken place in Bangladesh, and from the idea that Bangladesh, if any country can develop, Bangladesh can develop, that has actually not been proven true, because Bangladesh's growth has been quite extraordinary than other countries. So this is something I point out whenever I talk on the issue, on this particular issue, that Bangladesh has not followed any typical model of Western, economic, textbook. Rather, in the case of Bangladesh, there has been a lot of non-Western approaches. For example, looking at my own, resources, how I can involve it, connect it, make it relevant for my development project. In the case of Bangladesh, one of the key has been to develop in women. Develop in women's education, developments in women's empowerment, development in integrating women with economic activities. That has not been the case in the case of many South Asian countries and other underdeveloped countries. So I can say for sure that Bangladesh's bargaining power vis-a-vis other countries developed as Bangladesh relied on its internal resources. One might argue that Bangladesh did not have the kind of internal resources that would help a country to develop that is tangible, but Bangladesh has relied on its manpower. Bangladesh has developed in not only manpower export but also internal development of its man and women power, if I may sort of point it in this manner. So there has been a tremendous development in the country, which has given Bangladesh a sort of bargaining power vis-a-vis other countries that can be seen, especially from the decade of, second decade of 21st century, and it's ongoing. So this internal development has strengthened Bangladesh's bargaining power vis-a-vis other countries. So here in Bangladesh, we use a phrase which is growth without enmity, that Bangladesh has rather looked at, or emphasized on its foreign policy principle of friendship to all, malice towards none. And this has been sort of a driving force of Bangladesh's, or driving mantra of Bangladesh's foreign policy. So this is something that has made a difference in the case of Bangladesh, made a difference with Bangladesh, made a difference between Bangladesh with other countries.
So from this foreign policy mantra to engaging with the resources within your own country, I think Bangladesh is setting a very good example for other South Asian countries. And I think there's a lot to learn from Bangladesh's experience, because as South Asians, we see that Bangladesh is growing exponentially. And this is not something that was envisioned maybe 10, 15 years ago. Like you rightly said, nobody would have thought of Bangladesh's growth at this level, at this rate. So it's interesting to see that, like you said, Bangladesh has understood the need to prioritize its own resources being both biological and natural resources, the men and women in your society. And I think that's a very important point, that they're investing in the human resources. Professor Yasmin, speaking of Bangladesh and even China, recently earlier this year, you published an article called China in South Asia, in reframing globalization after COVID-19, pandemic diplomacy amid the failure of multilateral cooperation. Now, in this book and in your article, China in South Asia, what are some of the main points that you bring out? What are your arguments? It's still very fresh. And can you share some of your findings with us?
Yes, this was something that, I wrote back in, I think, July 2021. And you know how publishing takes quite some time to, come out. And so my argument was that, and with something on which I'm still working on, is that, China's, level of engagement or the manner of engagement is quite different in South Asia than, other parts of the world. And we often see China's BRI, China's engagement from a very, systemic perspective, in the sense that we think that, it is in China's interest to expand its influence, expand its presence to other parts of the world. But we often do not sort of evaluate China's acceptance from a recipient country's point of view. So my main argument was that it is not only that China wants to come, connect, and invest in South Asian countries, but we also have to point out if these countries have any other imperatives, if any particular imperatives in the case of, connecting with China. So you can see that how China is interacting with Southeast Asia and how China in South Asia is quite different, because in Southeast Asia, these countries have different kind of narrative. These countries have different kind of priorities. These countries have different kind of systemic pressure, as well as regional calculations to connect with China. Whereas in case of South Asia, which is a very lopsided region, 25% of the world's population live in this region, and mostly they live in India. It's a big brother. India has its own security concern. That is quite understandable. Any country would have, which is so big, which is as big as India, which shares border, land border with most of the South Asian countries, which also share maritime boundary with, Sri Lanka. So India has its own security concern. So India has its own neighborhood policy, which is often, seen from a very, its own, from its own national perspective. As I said, any country would have similar kind of, concern as India has. So for other South Asian countries, they also have to prioritize their national interests and their manner of, relationship with India. So in South Asia, I argued that China's entry has been relatively easier than in Southeast Asian countries because of overwhelming dominance of India. So you can see India being one of the great powers of, big powers of the world right now. For South Asian countries, they also need another bargaining tool vis-a-vis India. So China easily, comes to play because China also shares border with 4 of the South Asian countries, that is Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bhutan. So this is another unique advantage that China poses in its relationship with South Asian countries. So South Asian countries often now can take a bargaining tool against India using, China's, involvement in those countries. And we already know how in Nepal and Bhutan, China is engaged. So from Bangladesh's perspective, I also argue that this provides Bangladesh a perfect bargaining tool, to, balance between China and India. Having said so, I have also argued that it is not only China factor that determines, Bangladesh's politics in South Asian, in South Asia, especially with regard to India, because in 2019 I wrote that, what are the manners of Bangladesh's engagement with China and India. So here it is not only that China and India, they need Bangladesh, but also Bangladesh is needed by both China and India because of Bangladesh's geopolitical location at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal. Bangladesh can provide access to the landlocked countries of India and Nepal, as well as the northeast, Indian region. So there are a lot of, it's not only one-way relationship between Bangladesh and India, between Bangladesh and China, but it's a two-way communication, two-way road of connection among these 3 countries. So this is something I pointed out in China in South Asia chapter that I wrote as part of the book.
This is interesting, most interesting arguments, especially I think one of the arguments that resonates very loudly is that you mentioned China comes in as a bargaining power for South Asian countries alongside their relations with India. And this is interesting because I think this is something a lot of South Asian countries, the smaller South Asian countries, are facing when encountering and engaging with India. So China in South Asia seems like a good read. This is something definitely worth looking out in the future. Professor Yasmin, could you also briefly talk about the prospect of China-Bangladesh collaborations, especially within the post-COVID era? Now, you mentioned some of these important points of engagement, collaboration, 4 of the South Asian countries engaging with China already. But how would Bangladesh, specifically Bangladesh, engage with China in this post-COVID era?
It has been actually a continuation, I would say, with a pause during the COVID era. One of the interesting, aspect that I can see from being an academic in Bangladesh is that China's soft power engagement with South Asian countries, particularly with Bangladesh, has taken a new height because China is, providing free education, free, Chinese learning. Chinese language learning facilities to different universities in Bangladesh. China is engaging with the academics. This is beside this or alongside a hard infrastructure development or hard infrastructure investment from China. So this soft power engagement of China is often seen or often not highlighted as as they should have been, because it's the soft power engagement that has a long-term implications for any other countries. We are often, more amused by the power of Hollywood, the power of, Western cultural icons, Western cultural aspects. But we are also, by doing that, we are also ignoring the, involvement of China and other, Asian countries and their soft power influence. So I would say there has been a qualitative shift in the manner China is engaging with, at least with Bangladesh, where soft power engagement is given equal priority as well as hard power engagement. And this benefits both Bangladesh and China, because in Bangladesh, a lot of people, they need different kind of dispositions, they need different kind of job opportunities, they need different kind of economic vocations. So I would say a number of students, both younger and as well as older, they are now learning Chinese so that they can make themselves relevant to the changing reality where China is emerging as a country to be reckoned with. So this is one of the qualitative shift or qualitative area that I think we need to look into, we need to pay attention to.
Okay, so in the post-COVID era, you consider the soft power elements of Chinese engagement in Bangladesh playing a significant role. This is interesting because it shows a shift from hard power connectivity into soft power connectivity. And I think there's a lot of talk about China's soft power diplomacy, soft diplomatic engagements across South Asian countries. You also mentioned about these institutions that have been established. I'm guessing these are Confucius centers to teach about the Chinese culture and language in different universities and institutions. Again, a development that is seen across the world.
May I just add one point? Is that
absolutely?
I wouldn't say that it's a shift from hard power engagement to soft power engagement. Rather, I would say that this particular emphasis on soft power involvement, it actually emboldens the hard power engagement. So both are taking place parallelly. Strongly. What I would say that in the pre-COVID period, the level of soft power engagement was not as visible as we can see now. So that is actually providing some credibility to China's hard power engagement. And now I would say it's in a total scenario, China's engagement is being more visible from both hard power and soft power perspectives.
Absolutely. This makes sense. So soft power is adding value to the hard power engagements, and this will hopefully assist the bilateral relations prosper further into the future. Speaking of the establishment of various institutions, we noticed that some BRI-related research institutes have been set up and established in Bangladesh, like the Daffodil International University in Dhaka. Yeah. This attracted a lot of media attention, both, I think, in Bangladesh as well as even in China here. Professor Yasmin, how about your university? Did the Dhaka University also establish any Chinese centers or BRI research centers that, or do you know if there are any such prospective centers are coming up, so especially because you're the chair of the Department of International Relations? If not, what is the trajectory of research between Bangladesh and China in the academic sphere, especially research related to the Belt and Road Initiative?
That's an interesting question. Being chair of the my department, it gives me access to a lot of knowledge or policy making areas which I did not have before. So from my position, I can tell you that no, there are no BRI related research centers in University of Dhaka or in my department. However, as we can see, University of Dhaka wants to expand its academic collaboration with a number of countries, with a number of universities. So as part of that, in future, I wouldn't be surprised to see if there are connection, soft power connection and academic connection collaboration with Chinese universities and Chinese research centers. But we have a Confucius Center. This is not directly a part of BRI Center, but a Confucius Center, as part of which they also provide, they also offer free Chinese language learning, as I mentioned before, but not yet any BRI center, as happened in the case of Daffodil University. Remember, it's not only Daffodil University, but also in North-South University, they have a Confucius Center. So often, as I told you before, often it's very difficult to distinguish if it's part of BRI or if it's part of bilateral connectivity. So there's this overlapping, some money might be, I'm saying might be, coming from the BRI projects, and some might be coming from government level. I know, so it is, for example, the Daffodil was overtly part of BRI projects, but the Confucius centers are not so much directly part of BRI projects, but they are more part of, China's overall projection of its soft power in different countries.
Interesting. So we still see this dilemma of whether a project is a BRI related project or whether it's directly bilateral between the governments of Bangladesh and China. So Professor Yasmin, thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot and got a lot of insight on Bangladesh's connectivity and interactions with the Belt and Road Initiative. So thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best with your chairpersonship and all the best for 2023. Looking forward to further interactions with you.
Yeah, thank you as well for inviting me, especially as the Lunar Festival is going on, and amidst your festival, you could make time for me. Thank you very much, and hope this academic collaboration will continue.
Okay, Professor. Good. Have a good day.
You too.